Hey y'all, it's Lindsay. Today we are going to a potluck and I have agreed to bring some dessert and I want to show you what I'm going to be making. Oftentimes in the low carb keto world, we like to replace apples with zucchini squash. And that's usually a very good substitute for apple type dishes, but I find they get really mushy if you are not cautious with how long you bake those for, and it's kind of like, I kind of like my faux apple desserts to kind of have a little bit of that apple bite to them. And I have discovered that using the chayote squash, let's see if I can't get that focused. Yeah, chayotes. I'm not sure how to properly pronounce it. I find these at Walmart in the produce section. I find that using these instead of zucchini, especially in things like apple crisp, really gives you that apple-y kind of like bite to it rather than just kind of visually appearing to be like an apple. So I'm going to make an apple crisp to take with us to our potluck tonight, and I will show you that now. All right, first things first for this low carb apple crisp or faux apple crisp is getting your chayote squash all peeled up. Now that all these little guys are peeled, I'm gonna cut them open and I'm going to remove the seed. Each one has a single seed right there in the middle, and all you gotta do is just pop it out with your knife and move on to the rest. Now that the seeds are out, I'm gonna peel the rest of that skin off of the little crevice of each of the squash, and I'm gonna start slicing them up the way I would slice up apples for an apple crisp. For this recipe, we will need to cook these squash before we can do anything else. So I've put them all into a medium-sized pot, and I'm gonna add about 3 cups of water, and then I'm going to add a little splash of apple cider vinegar. And then we will move it over to the oven, or stove rather, and switch it on to high heat and bring this to a boil. And as you can see, it's just starting to simmer it up a little bit, and I want it to get to a full boil like this so that it can really tenderize those squash. And I'll turn down my heat a little bit since it is boiling, and I'm gonna let that work while I make the crumble topping. And for this, I'm gonna use about 1 cup of my DIY baking blend. And then about 2 tablespoons or 1/8 cup of the sweet blend. I will link those DIY videos up above. And then I'm using about 1/2 tablespoon of cinnamon. You can use more or less to taste. I kind of blended those up. And now I'm going to use frozen butter with any kind of crumbly textured crust or crisp. You really want to have super cold butter, and I find it just works best for me if I pull it straight from the freezer and kind of cube it up. It's a little more difficult to cut through, but it seems to yield pretty decent results. Now that it's all cubed up and into my food processor, I'm gonna go blend or pulse this up a few times just to kind of get that butter broken up and incorporated into my baking blend and sweetener. And then I'm gonna add in some shelled walnuts. I think I probably added about 1/2 cup of walnuts, 2 handfuls from my size hand. And then I'm going to add in some pecans. I would say I probably did a little less, so maybe like 1/3 cup, between 1/3 and 1/2 cup of pecans, a big pinch of salt, and then I'm going to go back to the food processor and pulse these in. My goal is to still have some chunks of those nuts to give it some good texture, but have them small enough to where it's not going to be an issue when you bite into them. Now that my squash have been boiling here for a little while, I am going to move on to the next step where I add in about a tablespoon of cinnamon. Again, that is to taste. I like cinnamon a lot. And then I'm going to add in about 4 tablespoons of my sweet blend, or also the equivalent of 1/4 cup. Because there's not really much sweetness to these squash, I like to add a little bit of extra. And now I'm going to bloom some gelatin. I'm going to bloom 1 teaspoon of gelatin in about a tablespoon of water. And I'm just going to gently kind of dust that on top of the water so it can all incorporate and absorb that water. And then I'm going to add some gluccomanan, about not quite a 1/4 teaspoon here is what I started with, and I'm going to mix that into my hot squash mixture there on the stove so that I can start to incorporate that. A little bit of salt like usual, and now I'm going to add my vanilla because I won't be boiling this for much longer. And I'm also going to add just a drop of molasses to give kind of more of a brown sugar richness to this dish. As I was stirring this up and letting it go, I realized that it wasn't thickening up the way that I wanted it to, so I decided to add 1 more 1/4 teaspoon of the gluccomanan, and you just whisk that as fast as you can into the hot liquid so it does not clump. We preheat the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and while that's working, I'm going to prepare my dish to go into the oven. All of my squash and liquid is going into the bottom of this Pyrex dish. And then I'm going to pour in my topping. And I like to put a thick crumble topping on top and just kind of pat it in, make it all even and nice and pretty. And now that my oven is ready, I'm going to pop that in for about 25 minutes to start. Okay, I have a couple minutes left and I'm noticing that it's looking pretty dry here on the top. So I'm taking a 1/4 cup of melted butter and drizzling that on top just to kind of add in some richness and some more moisture. And I'm gonna set my timer for another 5 minutes and see how it goes. Now that my timer is done, I am ready to pull this out. It is browned, it is bubbly, it looks delicious. I still have plenty of large pieces of nuts in my crumble topping or crisp topping here, and I think it's going to be delicious. I really appreciate you following along with this recipe today, and I hope that you give it a try, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.